Last week's video was on the USS Alabama. We were talking about big guns, big armor, big shipyards. And this video is on the USS Drum, which is a submarine of similar vintage. But this time we're not going to spend too much time talking about the World War II tech. Instead, we're going to be talking about strategy and tactics and how some of the lessons from undersea warfare of the past can apply to the gun industry of the future. Coming down into the bow of the submarine, and I bought this 15mm lens for everyday use, but mostly it's for touring inside of submarines. So last week's video was about the USS Alabama, which is a massive ship, and the USS Drum is also very big, but not so much on the inside. It's an extremely narrow sort of claustrophobic spot. If you like tight spaces, this is fantastic. Now, I don't particularly, but that doesn't stop me from loving submarines. And there's several things about submarines that are very fascinating to me. First off, submarines are being developed at a very technologically interesting time in history. There's a huge amount of advancement in machining and mechanical engineering, but we're still lacking a lot of what you might call modern computing capability. So this device that goes undersea has some pretty powerful mechanical computing capabilities, just like the USS Alabama, and some pretty incredible electrical capabilities as well. The interior of this submarine is just fascinating on many levels. From an engineering perspective, it's pretty incredible. From a combat perspective, thinking about actually using this thing in a coordinated fashion to attack enemies. And then even just from a design perspective, you know, making some of these things readable and intuitive and understanding when they are such gigantic mechanical pieces of stuff. This is just really interesting to me on a bunch of levels, but you probably don't care that I like to nerd out about really complex undersea equipment, maybe how this hydraulic manifold works. You probably want to hear the larger thoughts that I had about the gun industry and America in general, because there are lessons that I think that we can learn from not just this submarine specifically, but the way that teamwork worked during World War II in the Navy and how submarines operated inside of that. This thing has to not just be provable as a working prototype. This thing actually has to go out across the ocean and complete missions, oftentimes with a giant carrier group, but a lot of time just kind of on its own. Here's a whole bunch more communications equipment and lighting, electronic stuff. We've got big generators. Down here we've got big power plants. Over here we've got air intake silencers. I'm actually looking for the electrical components that I know are further aft and should be right back here. Yes. We've got battery banks, and we can see the readouts here of exactly what level of charge we're going to have across these. All kinds of different electrical equipment over here. And then this right here is fascinating to me. Check out these huge contactors. In the 1940s, battery technology is relatively primitive, but electricity is still electricity. So you have these gigantic switches connecting the battery banks to the electric motors and to the different banks. And then you can adjust the voltages here with these devices. It is incredibly rugged and solid state. And if you can see down there through the cracks, this is just an incredibly robust and rugged set of linkages. Now, here in the con, we do have the proper periscope here, like you would expect, and a number of different indicators and controls. And then over here, we have a firing solution computer, just like we saw on the USS Alabama, an analog computer that is able to calculate firing solutions, but this time it is for torpedoes, which have a little bit different ballistic things going on, but similar inputs where the motion of the ship needs to be compensated for so that it'll hit the much slower torpedo will actually impact at the right time. But then of course also the motion of this vessel must be compensated for. Now, there's also a navigation computer like the ballistic computer that takes inputs from gyroscopes and inputs from the propellers at the back and determines its actual location and speed based on various conditions. Then that location can be plotted on the map. Unfortunately, there's no map right here in the map reader, but all of these little ball screws and things allow you to input different directions and plot stuff on a map. Which brings me to kind of my main point about submarines. One of the things that I appreciate about submarines and the mission that they have is that it is often extremely independent. Yes, they're part of a larger fleet, they're part of a larger wartime battle plan, but they are off pretty much on their own a lot of the time. They're going far distances without any radio communication. They're picking targets of opportunity on their own and collecting information on their own and making really real-time tactical decisions based on what it is that they discover. But they're not working entirely independently. They still have to accomplish some of the goals of the larger fleet and of the nation. Here is a functioning map reader that actually has some specific patrols written on it. So we know what different units are actually doing, and we have a rough idea of what exactly needs to be accomplished. So this is relevant to me in a couple of different ways. As we think about, say, the course of the nation, a lot of us are operating very independently in the things that we think are important, but there does need to be some level of coordination between otherwise unorganized parties. The gun industry, for example, has a whole bunch of people who are business competitors in a very real sense, but they also are dependent on the same laws getting passed, or the same bad laws getting struck down, the same court cases being won. There's a way in which these different independent free enterprise organizations have each other's best interests at heart, even when they are fighting over sometimes the same dollars. So the level of independent tactical decision making that different companies and entities need to be able to make is very high. But at the same time, the level of coordination so that we're not working at cross purposes is kind of difficult, but I think that it really is necessary. I think that in the wake of a whole bunch of things that have happened recently politically, there is a need for some clearer voices. There is a need for some clearer directions. Even if we limit ourselves just to the gun industry, and we think about just the last year, it's been an economically difficult year for people selling firearms and firearms accessories. You just have to look at the NICS background check data to see that. There is a temptation for everybody in this particular industry to focus on the customers that are out there in order to keep their sales high. That is a much more tempting thing to do, I think, because it's easier. It's easier than trying to figure out ways where there can be a tide that lifts all the ships. But some level of coordination between these different entities could be really, really useful, particularly when you think about some of the challenges that lie ahead. And I think that the analogy ties in really well to submarines. They're operating essentially as lone wolves in one sense, but they really need to be part of a larger pack. They really need to be part of a larger fleet. They really need to be part of a larger battle plan with objectives that are defined, because victory also needs to be defined if it is going to be achieved. So, in and amongst all the incredible stuff inside of this beautiful machine, I think there is an interesting metaphor here. Now, I recorded that video 2 weeks ago, and when I left the submarine, as soon as I had cell phone coverage again, I got a text message telling me that Dr. WWII had died very suddenly. This was a personal blow to me, but also a strategic one. The Bachums had been working in Africa for several years and had just moved back to the States, and I had very high hopes for Vodi's leadership here in this theater, so to speak. In the last few months, the Christian church has lost John MacArthur, James Dobson, Charlie Kirk, and now Voddie Baucham. Now, some of those deaths were expected. That is a previous generation for some of those guys. A chapter is definitely closing, but some of those losses were very unexpected. It seems like a lot of strong and faithful leadership has just been lost in a really short space of time. And I would argue that this is irreplaceable leadership in many ways. Now, there are a lot of folks who are running to fill Charlie's shoes, sort of. It's not entirely true. I think a lot of folks are flying in their private jets to grab some of Charlie's fame and capitalize on his legacy. But there is no one person who will step up and take on all of his work, in the same way that there is no one man who will take over John MacArthur's specific role or match Voddie Baucham's exact strengths and wisdom, which were so valuable. And recognizing that these skills and talents and courage has been lost will either drive you to discouragement or a new level of resolve. Even if you never followed these specific men personally, maybe you were grateful for the people who did. Possibly there were areas of life and liberty where you could just kind of ignore them because you knew that they were being covered by these other guys. There were guys standing in the gap and fighting on these other fronts that were important, even if they weren't yours. But now, you know that there are groups of people over here who had been encouraged or mobilized or guided by these people who are now sheep without shepherds. Or to get back to the metaphor that we're actually talking about, we have ships that are scattered, but the work still needs to be done. Individuals cannot be individually replaced, but there are gaps in the line over here that still need to be filled. This is one of the great dichotomies of Christianity. People are irreplaceable, but at the same time, they are expendable because it is God that establishes the work and raises up new leaders. So whether we're talking about religion or politics or industry or education, there is a lot of work to do, even if all we want to do is rebuild some of the things that have been lost. This is thankless work. Sometimes it involves leading, sometimes it involves following, but usually it's a mix of both. And as we pursue different things for the good of the nation, there probably could afford to be a little bit more coordination between people who are trying to build, rebuild, protect, defend. Those all fall under the same category. The people who are doing these things are all allies. We can all be part of the same fleet. I think most of us would prefer to be operating like independent submarine captains, picking our own routes and our own missions, but there is a lot of value in collaboration and coordination, especially when you're not just picking targets of opportunity. You're actually trying to build something or rebuild something or protect something, which is the case for those of us that are wanting to rebuild America. If you look at the opportunities that exist based on some of the events of the last couple of weeks, they are significant, but they do take collaboration. There's a temptation amongst a lot of people to just say, well, Donald Trump is in office, so things are going to go swimmingly for the next few years, and now is the time to rest. Then there are other people who will make the case that we should make hay while the sun shines. And one of the best ways to do that is for there to be a little bit more collaboration, a little bit more coordination, a little bit more, I would say, working together, even amongst people who have traditionally been a lot more independent in their operations and their mission setting. And that's for when things are going well, but it's doubly true when there are setbacks. I know for myself, just personally, I like to have a very specific mission set. Like, I'm content when I have a narrow focus and I can really focus on that thing and know that the rest of the fleet is out there doing what needs to be done and things are going well. But despite things going quite well and a lot of successes in a lot of different areas, we have lost some ships recently in other areas, which means there are gaps that need filling. And I'm not just talking about the next celebrity leader that will pop up to take over certain responsibilities. I'm talking right now about you very specifically. If you're watching this video, you need to pick up some slack. I'm not saying that you need to become the next Charlie Kirk, because you're not going to. You're also not going to be the next Vodi Bakum. You're probably not going to be the next admiral of the gun industry, even if we knew what that was going to look like. But I'm telling you right now that you need to carry some of the load. And the good news is you can. Now, obviously, a submarine does not become a battleship just because a battleship got sunk, but with the right coordination and teamwork, you can have a task force respond flexibly with other units, meeting needs and filling gaps. And sometimes it's suboptimal, but oftentimes it is what is required. And you will have the opportunity to help out in that kind of situation now, to plug in somewhere and be flexible and work together as part of a team across a wide range of needs. I think that we're going to need to see a little bit less specialization in the future, a little bit less compartmentalization than we had with the previous generation. Just an assumption on my part. I'm personally right now feeling the need to have less of a narrow focus, and that I need to be a little bit more flexible. Now, here at TREX, we've talked for several years now about personal responsibility and the need for decentralized authority and the need for communities that are more resilient. And a lot of folks have applied those concepts really well. But generally, we've done this in ways that are kind of narrow. So some have focused on those principles when it comes to physical defense or manufacturing capability or church leadership or church doctrine. All very important things. But I think that moving forwards, there needs to be some more overlap and some more teamwork. And we're going to need to work on that because we have a very individualistic American culture. But that culture is still dependent upon a wider civilization. And as I think about the needs and the opportunities, I really like this analogy that we've been talking about. A powerful submarine. It is capable of being totally self-sufficient, but it is also totally dedicated to the support of the fleet's mission. It's a really small team that is totally responsible for the boat, but it is simultaneously serving the wider needs of the nation. So, that is one of my main takeaways from the USS Drum this year. Second takeaway is, even though I don't like small spaces, and I don't enjoy the ocean when it gets too big, together, actually really like this. Kind of want to get back on a boat sometime. Couple of book recommendations for you guys. Number one, if you want to learn more about World War II submarine operations, that strange combination of war effort and fleet management versus independent boats running long-distance missions, silent and deep, finding targets of opportunity, gathering information, and trying to determine when it is safe to relay that back to the fleet. Thunder Below is a book about the USS Barb. Really fascinating time. Then if you want something a little bit more modern, Tom Clancy has a book, a nonfiction book on submarines. It talks a little bit more about more recent submarine developments and more recent submarine and fleet tactics. I'm not an expert in this stuff. I really enjoy reading about it, but some of the ways that things have shifted along with the technology, different military doctrines, is fascinating. Although I just realized, I think that Tom Clancy book has a whole bunch of end of the Cold War era stuff. So like 1985, technically closer to World War II than to today. So apparently I need to get some more modern submarine books on my shelf.